All right. Okay. iPad, Roberta.
Ready, Bhante?
Okay. All ready? Now we are going to start our session with metta. Let us join together and recite metta all together. May all beings be happy and secure. May all beings have happy minds. Whatever living beings there may be, without exception, weak or strong, long, large, medium, short, subtle or gross, visible or invisible, living near or far, born or coming to birth, may all beings have happy minds. Let no one deceive another, nor despise anyone anywhere. Neither from anger nor ill will should anyone wish harm to another. As a mother would risk her own life to protect her only child, even so towards all living beings, one should cultivate a boundless heart. One should cultivate for all the world a heart of boundless loving friendliness, above, below, and all around, unobstructed, without hate or resentment, whether standing, walking, sitting, lying down, or whenever awake. One should develop this mindfulness. This is called divinely dwelling here, not falling into erroneous views, but virtuous and endowed with vision, removing desires for sensual pleasures. One comes never again to birth in the womb. With this metta thought in mind, let us begin our practice. We focus our mind on our breathing. As we breathe in and out, we only notice the rising and falling and breath touching the rims of our nostrils and expanding our lower abdomen and the chest area as we breathe in. And as we breathe out, we notice the contraction of our lower abdomen and the chest area, the breath leaving our nostrils. This happens always as we breathe in and out. Then also we feel the breath, we perceive the breath, we are aware of we pay mindful attention to breath, and we are aware of the breath. As we breathe in and out, these changes take place. One change is no different from the other. Therefore, one moment is not different from another moment. Change is the same all the time, changing. Not one is specific or different from other. As we see this, our breath becomes calm, relaxed and peaceful. The body becomes calm, relaxed and peaceful. Mind becomes calm, relaxed and peaceful. And we naturally let this happen and don't try to hold on to any particular thing, because nothing is particular. All the same change continuously. And there our greed will slowly fade away. And then as the body, mind, breath, all these relax, then we are relaxed in a very subtle way, and our resentment or rigidity, uptightness fades away. If rigidity is there, we are not relaxed. So we let that happen. When we are not rigid, that is the moment we are totally loosened up for the metta feeling to arise. And then we also know that we are practicing this meditation not only for ourselves, but all those millions of people suffer not only from the COVID-19, but also from other ways they, they suffer. And we want to share metta with them to be relieved from that suffering. Their compassion arises in us. And then we see everything is in a state of flux. Joy arises at that moment. Then our restlessness and worry fade away. Then sleepiness and drowsiness fade away because we are very earnestly, sincerely, with the commitment, effort we do this practice, and therefore sleepiness will not bother us at all. And then we also feel, since we all experience the results of our practice, confidence arises in us, then doubt fades away. These are very natural development. As I mentioned several times, this is the pattern, the theme, and we don't expect all these things to happen instantly. They happen very slowly, gradually, and then we gain joy, which leads to happiness and gain concentration. This concentration is not the concentration that makes us like a vegetable or like in deep sleep. Some people think concentration should be like in deep sleep. Not so. That is not correct or right concentration. Right concentration arises after right mindfulness. So we were practicing in virtually from the beginning, paying attention to rising, falling of everything. We practice mindfulness. And what remains is rising and falling. That is mindfulness practice. And then we gain concentration on the rising and falling. Rising and falling happens so quickly, so subtly, and there is no other object in our mind. And that is what is happening to our body, feeling, perception, thought, and consciousness. They are changing. What we notice is impermanence, anicca. And since we don't find any particular resting place as they are moving on and on, normally we have a desire to hold on to something. That desire also fades away. There arises dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. From this seeing anicca, when we see anicca in the deepest way, our notion of self completely dissolve, dilute, dissolve, vanish from our mind. This is how, when we practice anicca or impermanence, as the mind becomes concentrated on impermanence, our greed or impermanent and dukkha suffering and anatta arises. Through the practice of impermanence, through the concentration on impermanence, all this happens. You can see how mindfulness and concentration join together, shake hands to make us free from greed, hatred, delusion, and anicca, dukkha, anatta, becoming stronger to overcome greed, hatred, and delusion. Believe me, friends, if you really practice like this, there will no longer be a question about the difference between mindfulness and concentration when these two join together. That is called yuga nadda in Pali. Yuga means two, nadda means joining. So that will happen to us even though we start with metta, we end up in concentration and mindfulness, or mindfulness and concentration, to overcome our greed, hatred, and delusion. So let us continue this practice. Dukkha patta cha niddukkha, bhaya patta cha nibbhaya, soka patta cha nisoka, hontu sabbe pipanino. May the suffering be free from suffering. May the fear-struck be free from fear. May the grieving be free from grief. So too may all beings be. With this metta thought as background, let me try to answer your questions. Our friend Brian will read questions and I will answer them.
Okay. Dear Bhante, could you please clarify my understanding of the transition from samatha to vipassana when we go from metta meditation to vipassana via watching the breath? Samatha bhavana, as I understand, is to focus on a single object to develop concentration. Vipassana, in contrast, is to look at the thoughts as they come up through the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Alternatively, look at one's past experiences of an attachment for the root cause of greed, hatred, and delusion.
I think this is a good question. Let me repeat what I mentioned in my instructions every day. I said we practice metta, relax our body and mind, and as we relax the body and mind, our greed, resentment, restlessness and worry, sleepiness and drowsiness, and doubt fades away as our practice improves, develops, seeing the results in our own life during the practice. Now, when this happens, I actually mentioned very clearly that we gain joy, happiness, and concentration from seeing impermanence. We start with metta, which also is impermanent, we experience feelings which are impermanent. Our perception we perceive, it is impermanent. And the thought that arises, they are impermanent. Consciousness that arises every moment also is impermanent. So what we actually see, focus our mind, is impermanence. We don't find another time to practice impermanence. In this practice itself, we see things appearing and disappearing constantly, continuously, and that shows how impermanence works. When we see impermanence, we see our greed for anything that arises in our mind also is impermanent. Greed arises and greed passes away. Greed arises and stays couple of less than a second and passes away. Of course, when we have ignorance of the very nature of sankhara, that is, they are impermanent, if we bypass that golden opportunity to see impermanence purely because of our ignorance, that means we ignore that. We ignore that and look forward to something else and look forward to something else. The present moment's change we ignore. And that is our ignorance. Not seeing impermanence is ignorance. Not seeing anicca is ignorance. Not seeing suffering is ignorance. Not seeing selflessness is ignorance. When we ignore all this and become a subject to our own ignorance, then impermanence is not very clear in our mind. So, if we are very, I emphasize several times, without verbalizing, conceptualizing, without thinking of the past, without thinking of the future. If you think of the past, you are bypassing the present moment. If you think of the future, you are bypassing the present moment. Without bypassing the present moment, as things arise, we simply stay being aware of the changes taking place in us. Change taking place in us means in our experience. Every moment things arise and pass away. Every moment this happens, and we are practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness. I said mindfulness is seeing things as they really are. They not as they were in the past or not as they will be in the future, but as they are now. As they are now. This moment, while I am talking, I must know, I must experience, I must be mindful of the changes taking place in me, in my words, in my feelings, in my perceptions, in my thought, in my consciousness. I don't have to stop this talk to see these things. While I am talking, I experience impermanence. I experience anicca, dukkha. Dukkha in reality is so subtle, not some kind of physical dukkha. In a mental dukkha is actually called domanassa. Domanassa. In Mahasatipatthana Sutta, it is when dukkha is defined, dukkha, domanas, upayas, and so forth are defined very clearly in clear terms. dukkha is physical, domanassa is mental. So when we have mental domanassa, that is an outcome of dukkha. So while I'm talking, I experience domanassa, I experience dukkha. What is my domanassa? My domanassa is not being able to make you understand. So when I say this, if if I focus my mind on how I experience, I see I am trying in my as I understand Dhamma to make the listeners understand. That is my whole purpose of talking and teaching and writing. I try to convey this message to people, that is to see things as they really are, not as they were in the past or will be in the future. So I experience certain degrees of domanas, not with any particular person, not but with this inability to make this point clear to listeners. So while I'm doing that, I experience it. Not because I could not do it yesterday or I will not be able to do tomorrow, but while I am doing it, I experience it. So that is my dukkha. I see my anicca, I see anicca, I see dukkha, I see selflessness. Because of this anicca, dukkha arises. If there is self, that self should be able to control all these things and make the wish very effective, and people will understand clearly. So, because of not self, it is not easy for anybody to hold on to it, grasp it, stay on it, command, and if there is a self, I should be able to command the mind to make people understand very clearly. Since I don't have self, I'm unable to explain these things very clearly. So, friends, what I'm trying to say is when we practice metta first, relax the body and mind, and we begin to focus our mind on the breath which is rising and falling, the feelings rising and falling, perception rising and falling, thought rising and falling, and consciousness rising and falling. So by focusing on them, what I gain is the concentration of impermanence. My concentration pivots around impermanent, no other object. And therefore, what Buddhists call this yoga nadda. Yoga means two. Nadda means joining. Mindfulness and concentration joins together in our practice. You can see both or two in one. Two in one. That is called Yuganadha. In focusing mind on our impermanence, on experience of impermanence, at the same time we gain mindfulness as well as concentration. So I'm glad you asked me this question. I try again. If you ask me this question again, I try to clarify it in the using my ability to make it clear. Okay, next question.
Thank you, Bhante. That was very clear. Bhante, earlier you explained the simile of the bundles of bamboo supporting each other. There is no name and form without consciousness, and no consciousness without name and form. Does a type of consciousness exist in the higher jhanas?
Uh, yes, consciousness exists in higher jhanas because the meditator knows that the person is going from one conscious moment to another, one perception to another, as you see in Potthapada Sutta in Digha Nikaya. I encourage you to read Potthapada Sutta, where Buddha mentioned, I think I mentioned this sutta several times. Buddha said, by training we overcome certain perceptions and cultivate certain perception by training until we reach the neither perception nor non-perception, and then come out of it and see anicca dukkha anatta, even in that subtlest state of consciousness. So, surely consciousness is there when there is perception. Now, to answer the other part of the question, two bamboo sticks, two bundles of bamboo sticks is the simile Venerable Sariputta used to explain the relationship between nama, rupa, mentality and materiality. Mentality does not have a core, heart in it. What is the mentality? Feeling, perception, or let me use the way I remember, Phassa Vedana Sanya Chetana Manasikara. Contact, feeling, sanya perception, consciousness, sanya, Phassa Vedana Sanya Chetana thought, Phassa Vedana Sanya and thought, and attention. These five together is called one bundle. That's called nama. Then materiality, as everybody knows, elements, four elements: earth, air, water, fire, elements. Now, consciousness is the one that works like a pendulum, going this way and that way, going to it is with the mentality and it is also with materiality. Materiality does not have life if there is no consciousness. Mentality cannot know anything if there is no consciousness. And therefore, but neither mentality nor materiality has any permanent, eternal core or heart or soul or self. That is why Venerable Sariputta used bamboo sticks. Bamboo, also called in Pali tacha sara. Tacha means skin. Sara means essence. The essence of the hard or hard core, hard wood of the bamboo is the skin itself. Skin itself. The inside there is no central heart, central hard core, hard wood in it. And therefore he uses these two terms. Similarly, neither materiality has permanent eternal self, nor mentality has eternal soul, neither in the consciousness that joins these two together has permanent called or soul or self. See, sir, because I mentioned in the in other discourse, the middle, the, these two are connected with the desire. And consciousness and mental materiality join together without any causes, any heart, because this arises dependently. When one arises, the other arises, and then at that moment we experience both. When one does not arises, other does not arises, then we don't experience either of them. Dependent origination formula, as we repeated many times, when this being, this is, this ceases, arising this arises, passing away this passes away. That is the formula. So, what we see in the middle is the results of this rising, arising, and passing away. So, to explain that there is not one single entity continuously, consistently exists all the time. They arise depending on something and passes away depending on something. In order to show this phenomenon of dependent origination, Venerable Sariputta used that simile. Okay. Any other question?
Yes, Bhante. Last week we said that the thought is volitional formation and will, but thought is also conditioned and changing, something we cannot control. How can we say it is will and changing without control at the same time? How can we say there is our free will?
Okay. Will, could you read the question again?
Sure. Last week we said that the thought is another idea. Mehmet, do you want to ask the question verbally? See if maybe he can answer.
But this is the one, isn't it?
Okay.
Can you magnify it?
I can't magnify. Last week we said that the thought is volitional formation and will, but thought is also conditioned and changing, something we cannot control. How can we say it is will and changing without control at the same time? How can we say there is our free will?
Okay. Well, will is not free, but we can make it free. Free from greed, hatred, and delusion. And will can also be either wholesome or unwholesome, depending on our mental states. If the will is has underlying tendency of greed, hatred, or delusion, this is unwholesome will. If the will is free from greed, hatred, and delusion, that is wholesome will. Now, there is a will to do wholesome thing. That doesn't mean the wholesome thing is permanent or the will is permanent. There can be a will to do unwholesome things. That doesn't mean that will there also is permanent. So it is dependently arises and dependently it passes away. But we can, seeing suffering from our own personal experience, that you cannot hide. You cannot hide the suffering you experience personally. Seeing this, you make a will. People make wills for their properties, to transfer their property to someone. It is not that kind of will. This will is to, when you experience suffering, you will to get out of this suffering. That's an inner urge. For that, you don't have to have a permanent self or some other external agent to make you come, to make you a decision, to make a will to get out of this suffering. It comes from within. And so you do certain things. For instance, when you want to practice Bojjhanga, factors of enlightenment, you have to have a will. When you want to prevent painful, unwholesome, various thoughts, these are called unwholesome, evil thoughts. When from your own personal experience, any evil thought with the underlying tendency of greed, hatred, and delusion can cause you harm. And therefore, you make a will not to have that kind of thought. For that, you don't have to have anything permanent, but you want not to have this unwholesome thought in your mind, because you, from a previous experience, any unwholesome thought makes you painful, unhappy. And also, if in spite of your wish not to have unwholesome thoughts are so powerful as habits. Since we have had unwholesome thoughts all your life, perhaps all in samsara, not always unwholesome, but unwholesome thoughts arise very often. And when they arise, even when you don't want them, then you have to have a will to get rid of that unwholesome thought. Then when you let it go, the experience you have would be very pleasant, peaceful experience. And you want to make a will to arouse that kind of peaceful mental state. And then once it is arisen, then you have to make will to maintain, sustain, support that keeps you calm, relaxed, peaceful, without hurting you or hurting others. So will arises naturally as an inner urge to free ourselves from suffering. That is the difference between human and animal suffering. When animals suffer, they just suffer. They don't know anything. They might look for a pleasant moment, a comfortable place, but they don't have any plan, any way of thinking, not to have suffering in future. But we human beings have a strong inner urge while suffering to find a solution that would never cause suffering again. Therefore, will is extremely important in our liberation from samsara. As you all know, even the will is not permanent. And yet, we are free to make that will without anybody's instigation, because we experience suffering and we independently think of getting rid of suffering, not just having a temporary relief band-aid, but we want to have a permanent cure for suffering. And for that, will is extremely important. And will also is impermanent. For instance, you have a will to come to bhavana. And you make effort, you ask people, go to internet and do all necessary things. You make effort and you have a will. When you come to bhavana, what happens? What happened to that will? It is gone. Now you experience your stay, experience the peace at bhavana. So, you had the will first and use the will to fulfill your wish. Once the wish is fulfilled, you don't need that will again for that particular purpose. For another thing, you may have will again. But therefore, will arises and will passes away. It is impermanent, but you are 100% free to make that will. And in that sense, will is free will. I think, friends, this may be good. I'm sorry, yesterday I could not, I had a doctor appointment, or previously made it, but I had forgotten. That is the nature of this mind as we are getting older. And I must mention to you, I have another appointment on the 9th. That day also I will not be here to lead the morning session. You continue your practice as you did yesterday. I'm so happy, my friends. This one made it happen for all of you to, not to be disappointed. And thank you very much. And I want to conclude this session. There are people who are suffering. I know some of my distant relatives suffering in very much with lot of pain, suffering from cancer, living in Sri Lanka, and I heard she is in a very advanced state and suffering. I want to share our metta with her, along with all other suffering patients, to relieve from their suffering and experience peace. And those who are suffering from COVID-19 be free from their suffering and return to normal health. And those who are in pain, grieving the death of their loved ones, millions of them all over the world, may they all be free from that suffering, that grief, especially through the practice of metta and practice of Dhamma, understanding Dhamma. And there are people who are in hospitals taken care of by very compassionate doctors, nurses, and hospital staffs. And may they continue their selfless service and live long in good health without getting affected by this COVID-19. There are others who very generously make donations to organizations, individuals, to make this time pass very smoothly. And we want to wish them also to be very peaceful and happy and continue their generous practice wherever they feel like. And there are some others who make decisions to help people. They all may not be experts in the nature of virus, but the information that they gather from other people can make decisions. Some leaders have made decisions and help people and help this COVID-19 control in their own particular nations, places, organizations. And also I want to wish others who have not yet made wise decision to be wise, compassionate and understanding, to make right decision for the benefit of all human beings. With this very sincere earnest wish, I don't have any particular agenda, personal agenda, but I simply want to do this with utmost sincerity, honesty, for all living beings. And with this, I want to end this morning session. I thank you, everyone, for coming and participating in this. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sadhu.
Ahiji.